In 2014, Toshinobu Matsumiya tweeted out this picture of what the Pokemon game's timeline was at the time. Matsumiya has worked on every single main series Pokemon game ever since Pokemon Yellow as a scenario writer, and although this timeline was never officially confirmed and was eventually deleted, it still gives us somewhat of an indication as to what the Pokemon timeline can be and where to start where we can try and figure out what the timeline could be. Now each Pokemon game follows a different story with mostly different characters in each game, however they all still are a part of the same world and are connected in some way, shape, or form. There are some elements and hints throughout every single game that tie each region together in some way, however we don't have a specific timeline of events for the Pokemon world to account for every single game. You might assume that the Pokemon timeline follows the game releases, with Red and Blue being the first in the timeline, and the most recent releases being the latest in the timeline, and with each remake games taking the same place as their originals, but that isn't exactly the case. Referencing Matsumiya's timeline again, we see that it all starts with Fire Red and Leaf Green and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire taking place at the very same time. Based on what we know, we can confirm that Heart Gold and Soul Silver definitely take place after Fire Red and Leaf Green, like this timeline suggests, since the events in Heart Gold and Soul Silver are said to take place a couple of years after the disbandment of Team Rocket, and because of Red, the main character in Fire Red and Leaf Green, also appearing in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, with his age being older according to Bulbapedia. Red's age is going to play a very important role when trying to figure out this timeline, since he appears in multiple different games as a playable character and an NPC. This is all assuming that Red hasn't time traveled or anything like that, which although might sound a little bit crazy, it is somewhat plausible in the context of Pokemon thanks to things like Serebii. And although we don't really have a clear indication that this would ever be the case, it still could be possible. Now going on back to the start of the timeline, it has Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire taking place at the same time as Fire Red and Leaf Green. To be honest, there's very little information I can find suggesting that the events in these games take place at the same time, outside of Matsumiya's tweet. We can confirm that Red doesn't appear in any of the Hoenn games, which could be because Red was busy traveling through Kanto if they did take place at the same time. However, that's still quite a reach and doesn't really confirm anything. There are a few other games that Red doesn't appear in, and although with some of them we have other hints to suggest where they would fit in the timeline in relation to where Red's adventure started, the exclusion of Red doesn't exactly suggest that Oras definitely took place at the same time as Fire Red and Leaf Green. We'll leave it there for now, but we'll continue on and we have Diamond and Pearl taking place at the same time as Heart Gold and Soul Silver, following Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. One theory that links these two together is that they are both the only regions to have the red Gyarados appear in it, although in the case of Diamond and Pearl you never actually encounter it, and only hear about it from TV and your rival telling you about it at the very start of the game. The red Gyarados was said to appear in the Johto region due to the radio waves from Team Rocket angering it and forcing it to evolve. This could imply that the red Gyarados in Sinnoh appeared due to the radio waves as well at the same time, although this would also have to imply that Sinnoh is located near Johto in order for the Gyarados to hear the radio waves, which opens up a whole nother can of worms with Pokemon geography. Pokemon geography is a lot like the Pokemon timeline, as we don't really know too much about it that is confirmed, and all this is just based off of some guesses. What I will say though is that Sinnoh is referenced to be in the north and is based off of Hokkaido, Japan, which is the northeasternmost part of Japan. Assuming that this is true for the Pokemon world, then Sinnoh could be located north of Johto, which is also based on part of Japan in the south, which if that is the case, then maybe the range of the radio waves could have caused the red Gyarados. But if Sinnoh was in range, then Kanto should have also been in range and a red Gyarados should have appeared there, but there's nothing suggesting that that happened. Red also doesn't appear in Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum for that matter, which would make sense since if they do take place at the same time as Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Red would have been busy in Johto at the time. Professor Rowan is also said to have done research in Kanto a year prior to the events of Red traveling through Kanto, meaning that the events of Diamond and Pearl have to take place at least after the events of Red becoming the champion of the Kanto region. Next, according to this timeline, we have Black and White 1 following Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Diamond, and Pearl. No other generation is suggested to have taken place at the same time as it, but thanks to a Team Rocket grunt living in Icarus City who says he used to be a part of Team Rocket, we know that Black and White 1 take place after Heart Gold and Soul Silver. This is the same grunt who stole the machine part from the power plant in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and his wife will give you a Rage Candy Bar and tell you that they used to bring the family together, much like his old teammates, implying that it's Team Rocket in the Johto region. This grunt makes both Generation 5 games pretty easy to place in the timeline, since he suggests that Black and White 1 took place after Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and we already know that Black and White 2 take place after Black and White 1. Black and White 2 have references to Black and White 1 and take place a few years after Black and White 1, making it pretty easy to place in the timeline. Red also appears in Black and White 2, said to be between the ages of 19 and 29. Seeing as Red was 14 in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, it makes Black and White and Black and White 2's place in the timeline fit pretty nicely. Now this is where things get even more complicated, as the timeline suggests that X and Y take place at the same time as Black and White 2. The glaring issue with this is the fact that Mega Evolution doesn't appear in Black and White 2 at all, meaning it wouldn't make sense if it took place at the same time, and would make more sense if it took place later. But then if you look at the start of the timeline, it also suggests that Oras was at the start, which also features Mega Evolution, some Megas that weren't prevalent in X and Y. You may also notice that we've only talked about the remake games in the timeline, and not some of the other games, most importantly, Ruby and Sapphire. That's why I think it would make more sense to adjust the timeline like this, adding on Red and Blue with Fire Red and Leaf Green, replacing Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire with regular Ruby and Sapphire, leaving Heart Gold and Soul Silver and adding a long Gold and Silver with it, and either putting X and Y after Black and White 2, or putting in its own separate timeline entirely. The more I think about it, we could probably split the Pokemon timeline into 3 or 4, maybe even more different timelines, but for now let's just focus on 2 timelines. The one that I just proposed is known as the Classic Timeline, as it starts with Red and Blue and ends with Black and White 1, and going forward we'll talk more about the Mega Timeline, which involves Oras and X and Y. So now we have to put Pokemon X and Y somewhere. I'm going to guess that Pokemon X and Y have to take place in the same universe as Oras are the only other games as of 2014 to feature Mega Evolution. This is not prevalent in the GBA versions of Hoenn, implying that there's 2 different universes that the Hoenn region exists in. Red does not appear in either of these games, and we know that Kanto exists in the Mega Timeline, since Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon would be in the same timeline as well, which Red appears in, as well as some Alolan form Pokemon originally from Kanto. Now Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee feature Mega Evolution as well, meaning they could take place in this same universe timeline as well, but that causes another issue. The events of Let's Go are pretty much the same as Pokemon Red and Blue, except this time there's a different protagonist, different rival, and the inclusion of Megas, which was absent from the other Kanto-based games. Red does still appear in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee though, which doesn't make any sense since he has also defeated Team Rocket and did the same events that you did in your own story in Let's Go, so it wouldn't make sense for it to happen twice. Let's Go causes a lot of issues with this timeline, since although his age is not confirmed, we do know that Red defeated the Elite Four years before the players started their journey in Let's Go. Due to the big age gap in Red's potential ages between Red and Blue and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, I am going to assume that Let's Go takes place before the events of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, but I still can't think or find a good explanation as to why the events of Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee are so similar to the events of Red and Blue, despite having different characters, and why Red appears in Let's Go, despite the games that Red is the protagonist in following the same exact events. Perhaps in this alternate timeline, Red never had to deal with Team Rocket and just focus on becoming the champion, leaving Team Rocket for the player in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, or maybe Red was able to travel through different dimensions. Red traveling through different dimensions might sound ridiculous again, but we have to remember that in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which Red also appears in, there's the Ultra Recon Squad who do just that, which also could suggest that Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon take place in different timelines, also due to the story differences between the 2 games. So to reiterate and put these timelines side by side, here is what I'm guessing is the original or classic timeline, and here's what I think the Mega Timeline could look like. This isn't to say that regions like Unova, which are absent from the Mega Timeline, don't exist in that universe, but rather that the events that happened in Unova that we saw in Pokemon Black and White and Black and White 2 happened in the original Classic Timeline, while in the Mega Timeline we have yet to see the Unova region. If we ever get a Diamond and Pearl remake that features Mega Evolution, then it could fit in with the Mega Timeline as well. But now where do we place Sword and Shield? Sword and Shield are an interesting case because they don't have Mega Evolution, but they also don't have Z moves. Since Z-moves are also only present in the Mega timeline and are exclusive to Alola, it is possible that they can have their own timelines entirely with Z-moves, but for simplicity's sake, let's just assume they're in the same timeline as the Megas for now. Sword and Shield, however, could be placed back in the classic original timeline, mainly due to the absence of Mega Pokemon, and since we have some Alolan forms in Galar, we can assume that a version of Alola exists without Mega Evolution in the original timeline. This would account for most of the main series games across separate timelines, however there's still a couple that can influence both of the timelines and potentially add a third or fourth if you want to consider Sun and Moon in its own timeline entirely because of the way Z-moves work. Now in Pokemon Yellow version, you follow mostly the same events as Red and Blue. The difference is this time you have access to all 3 of the original Kanto starters and Pikachu as your original starter. Seeing as Red's team in every main series game he appears in, except for Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, have all 3 Kanto starters on it, it could imply that we can replace Red, Blue, Fire Red, and Leaf Green in the original timeline with Yellow version. This other timeline, which I guess we can call the classic Yellow timeline since it differs from the other classic timeline, could also include Gold and Silver in it, with Heart Gold and Soul Silver remaining in the original classic timeline, or possibly Yellow version being the starting point that splits into 2 different timelines. The reason why I say this is because Red has an Espeon on his team in Gold and Silver and Crystal version, but that Espeon is replaced with a Lapras in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and remains a Lapras in every other game that Red appears in. I'll put up another graphic of the potential timelines that I'm guessing about here, and of course there's still a lot of discrepancies since very little of this is ever officially confirmed, and some of the evidence linking the games together is pretty loose. And as for games like Emerald and Platinum, which feature some minor changes from the original games they're based on, they can each take place in a split-off version of the timeline off of Yellow or Red and Blue, which I think would make a lot of sense due to the similarities between games like Emerald and Ruby and Sapphire. You could argue that the split is actually reversed and Emerald's in the original timeline due to the fact that Team Aqua and Team Magma are in Emerald and do different things, versus in Ruby and Sapphire where Team Aqua and Team Magma interact differently. Since if we put Ruby and Sapphire in the same timeline together, it wouldn't make too much sense due to the different motives between the evil teams in both games. So for one last time, here is a graphic as to what my guess the original Pokemon timeline is, as well as any other timelines or split off timelines. Keep in mind that most of this is not official or confirmed by Game Freak or Nintendo, as although a Game Freak employee did tweet out a timeline back in 2014, that doesn't exactly confirm it, and we haven't had any official evidence since. This timeline actually got a lot hairier and messier than I thought when I started making this video. I really thought it would just be 1 or 2 concise timelines, but it seems like they all split off on random points. Let me know in the comments down below if you think this timeline should be changed in any way, or if there's some evidence out there that I missed that suggests that my guesses are wrong for these timelines, as there are still definitely some holes in my theories due to the ambiguity of the Pokemon timeline. Now to be realistic, the most plausible explanation for the Pokemon timeline is that there really isn't a timeline and they just release games as they want with little continuity between them in terms of a story, especially when you consider the amount of absolutely ridiculous events that happen in Pokemon games like Team Aqua wanting to flood the world or Team Flare wanting to blow up the world. But I think it's still fun to speculate what the full timeline could be. You could go a bit farther than this and include some of these side games or spin-off games, since some of them do take place in the same world as the main series games, more notably Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon X Gale of Darkness, which you can transfer Pokemon between some of the main series games in the 3rd generation. I personally never beat either of those games in their entirety before, and since they're the only games with Shadow Pokemon, they could even be in their own timeline as well. Now I had to rewrite this script entirely once already and rework quite a few parts in it as I discovered more information and hints through Pokemon games, so please leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more Pokemon videos, since this video required a lot more research and work than any other video I've made in a while. But if you made it this far, I want to thank you all so much for watching. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I will see you all next time, and bye bye.